Maya pulled down the metal shutter of her small pottery studio, the sound echoing through the empty street. It was past 10 at night and the coastal town had already gone to sleep. She wrapped her scarf tighter around her neck. The autumn wind had started biting harder these days, carrying with it the smell of salt and dying leaves. Her hands were still covered in clay dust. She'd spent the entire evening trying to fix a ceramic vase that kept cracking in the same spot, no matter how carefully she worked. 3 weeks ago, she'd received another rejection email from a gallery in the city. They said her work was interesting but not quite what we're looking for right now. It was the 4th rejection this year. Sometimes she wondered if she should just give up and find a normal job like her sister kept suggesting. The cobblestone streets were quiet except for the sound of her footsteps. Old streetlights flickered on and off, casting long shadows that danced on the walls of closed shops. Maya liked walking at night. There was something peaceful about having the whole town to yourself, even if that peace came with a side of loneliness. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Ethan locked the lighthouse door behind him. His shift was over, but he never really felt like his work ended. Being a lighthouse keeper was more than a job. It was a way of life, a commitment to solitude. He'd chosen this path 3 years ago, right after his mother passed away. The isolation helped back then. Now he wasn't so sure. He carried his camera bag over his shoulder. Photography was his second love, though it didn't pay the bills like the lighthouse work did. Tonight he'd captured some decent shots of the beam cutting through the fog. But looking at them on his camera screen left him feeling empty, like something was missing from every frame. Ethan decided to walk to the only cafe that stayed open past midnight. He needed coffee and maybe some human conversation, even if it was just small talk with the teenage kid who worked the night shift. The path took him through the old part of town, past buildings that had stood there for over 100 years. The iron bridge was right in the middle of his route. It was a small thing, really. Just a walking bridge over a dried-up creek bed that only filled during heavy rains. But it was beautiful in its own way, with intricate metalwork that people didn't bother making anymore. A single streetlight stood at one end, but tonight it was acting up, flickering like a candle about to die. Maya reached the bridge first. She paused for a moment, looking up at the sky. The moon was barely visible behind a thin layer of clouds, just a faint glow that didn't provide much light. She pulled her phone out to check the time, but then decided against it. What did it matter? She had nowhere to be. No one waiting for her at home except a cat who was probably asleep anyway. She walked onto the bridge, her shadow stretching out on the stone wall beside her. The flickering streetlight made it dance and jump. For a moment she watched it, thinking how strange shadows were. They followed you everywhere but never had any weight, any substance. Just dark copies of yourself. That's when Ethan stepped onto the other end of the bridge. Neither of them noticed each other at first. Maya was lost in her thoughts about the rejected gallery proposal, wondering if she should try a different style, something more commercial. Ethan was replaying the phone call he'd had with his father that afternoon. The old man wanted to meet for dinner, wanted to talk about things. Ethan had said maybe, which really meant no. They walked past each other in that awkward way strangers do, where you're aware of the other person but pretend you're not. Maya kept her eyes down. Ethan looked straight ahead. A simple moment, forgettable. Nothing special, except something happened that neither of them saw. On the stone wall of the bridge, where the weak moonlight and the dying streetlight mixed together, their shadows touched. Not just touched but merged, overlapped, became one single shape. For just a few seconds as they passed each other, their shadows on that wall looked like two people embracing, like they'd known each other forever. The shadows leaned into each other with a kind of recognition that the physical bodies walking by didn't feel. If someone had been watching from a distance, they might have thought it was beautiful, or strange, or maybe both. But no one was watching. Mrs. Chen had already packed up her flower cart for the night. The cafe kid was busy scrolling through his phone. The town slept on unaware. Maya continued walking, pulling her jacket tighter. She felt a weird chill run down her spine like someone had brushed past her. But when she turned around, the bridge was empty. Ethan had already disappeared around the corner. She shrugged it off and kept going home. Ethan felt it too, that strange sensation of missing something important, like when you forget why you walked into a room. He stopped for a second, almost turned around, but then shook his head. Too much coffee, probably. Or not enough sleep. The lighthouse schedule messed with your brain sometimes. He continued to the cafe, ordered his usual black coffee, and sat by the window. Outside, the faint moonlight struggled to break through the clouds. He pulled out his camera and scrolled through the night's photos again. Still felt incomplete. Still felt like something was missing from every single shot. Back at her apartment, Maya couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with a sketchbook, drawing without thinking. When she finally looked down at what she'd created, she frowned. It was the iron bridge drawn from memory, but in her sketch there were two shadows on the wall, standing close together, almost touching. She lived alone. She'd been alone on that bridge. Why had she drawn two shadows? She closed the sketchbook and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. In her dreams, she walked that bridge again and again, always feeling like she was searching for something she'd lost but couldn't remember losing. Miles away, in his small room at the lighthouse, Ethan lay awake too. Through his window, he could see that faint moon, still hiding behind clouds. He thought about the bridge, about that strange feeling of missing something. His shadow stretched across the floor from the moonlight, and for just a moment he could swear it looked incomplete, like half of a picture that needed another half to make sense. But that was ridiculous. Shadows were just shadows, nothing more. Neither of them knew that something had begun that night. Something old and strange and true. Their shadows had recognized what their hearts were still too afraid to see. And shadows, unlike people, never lie about what they feel. 2 weeks passed, and Maya started noticing things that didn't make sense. Small things at first, easy to ignore, easy to blame on stress or lack of sleep. It started in her studio. She'd be working on a pot, shaping the clay with her hands, completely focused, but then she'd catch movement from the corner of her eye. Her shadow on the wall would seem wrong somehow, angled in a way that didn't match where the light was coming from. She'd turn to look directly at it, and everything would be normal again. "You're losing it," she muttered to herself one afternoon, wiping clay from her hands. Too many late nights, but it kept happening. One evening, she stood up from her work table and walked to the other side of the room to grab more supplies. When she glanced back, her shadow was still at the table, lingering for just a second before it caught up with her. Like it had been reluctant to leave. Maya started paying attention. Maybe too much attention. She noticed her shadow seemed to reach toward the window sometimes, stretching longer than it should, as if trying to touch something outside. When she walked home at night, her shadow on the street would fall at strange angles, not quite matching her movements. "I need a vacation," she told her cat, Pepper, who just blinked slowly and went back to sleep. Or therapy. Maybe both. She tried to focus on work instead. A small local cafe had commissioned 3 pieces from her, which was good news. She needed the money. But even while working, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She started sketching again in her free time, always the same subject, shadows. Shadows on walls, shadows on water, shadows touching other shadows. Across town, Ethan was dealing with his own strange experiences. It started with his photography. He'd been documenting the lighthouse and surrounding areas for years, building a portfolio he hoped might lead to something bigger someday. But lately, his photos were coming out wrong. Not technically wrong. The exposure was fine, the composition decent, but there was something in them that shouldn't be there. His shadow appeared in places where it had no business being. In one photo of the sunrise over the ocean, his shadow stretched across the frame even though he'd taken the shot with the sun behind him. In another, a picture of the town square at noon, his shadow appeared twice in 2 different directions. He thought his camera was broken. He borrowed a friend's camera and took the same shots. Same thing happened. "Equipment's fine," his friend told him. "Maybe you're just seeing things that aren't there." Artists do that sometimes, but Ethan knew what he saw. And it got weirder. In his darkroom at the lighthouse, where he developed his film prints, he started seeing his shadow behave strangely on the walls. It would move when he stood still, lean when he stood straight, and worst of all, it looked like it was dancing with someone, reaching for another shadow that wasn't there. One night, he stood in the lighthouse observation room, just watching his shadow in the rotating beacon light. As the light swept around, his shadow moved across the curved walls. But it didn't look like his shadow alone. It looked incomplete, like a puzzle piece missing its match. "This is crazy," he said out loud, his voice echoing in the empty room. "Shadows don't do this." Shadows are just light and the absence of light, basic physics. But knowing the science didn't make the feeling go away. He felt like his shadow was trying to tell him something, trying to show him something important. And he had no idea what it was. Both of them separately found themselves drawn back to the iron bridge. Neither planned it. Neither decided consciously to go there. They just ended up walking that way during their evening routines. Maya went there 3 times in 1 week. She'd stand on the bridge, looking at the stone wall where shadows fell, trying to understand why this place felt significant. She'd pull out her sketchbook and draw the bridge over and over, always including shadows in her drawings. 2 shadows. Always 2. Ethan brought his camera to the bridge one misty evening. He took dozens of photos from every angle, trying to capture whatever it was he felt there. When he developed them later, one photo stood out. It showed the bridge wall with a single shadow on it, his shadow, reaching toward the right side of the frame, reaching for something, or someone. He pinned that photo to his wall and stared at it for an hour. Mrs. Chen noticed both of them during their separate visits to the bridge. She was an old woman who'd lived in the town her entire life, running a small flower cart near the market during the day. But she often walked at night too, when her arthritis made sleep difficult. She'd seen something like this once before, 60 years ago, when she was young. 2 people in the village where she grew up, both acting strange, both drawn to the same place, both talking about their shadows behaving oddly. The elders back then had a name for it, an old story about shadows falling in love before the people did. She watched Maya sketch on the bridge one evening, watched the young woman's shadow on the wall. She watched Ethan photograph the same spot 2 nights later, watched his shadow reach across the stone. She saw what they couldn't see yet. She saw 2 shadows that remembered each other even though the people had forgotten. Not my place to interfere, she whispered to herself, clutching her shawl tighter against the cold. These things unfold in their own time, but she worried. Sometimes people fought what their shadows knew. Sometimes they ran from the truth until it was too late. Maya tried to ignore what was happening. She threw herself into work, accepting more commissions than she could handle. She worked 16-hour days, coming home exhausted, hoping tiredness would quiet the strange feelings. Her new pieces were different from her usual style, darker, more abstract. Every piece seemed to be about duality, about 2 things becoming one, about shadows and light. One of her regular customers, an elderly man who bought a vase every month for his wife's grave, looked at her new work with concern. "You putting your soul in these pieces," he said. "That's good. But don't lose yourself in the clay, young lady. Remember to come up for air." Ethan took extra shifts at the lighthouse. The more he worked, the less he had to think about the weirdness happening with his shadows and photos. His supervisor noticed and offered him a promotion, a position at a bigger lighthouse on an island 3 hours away. More responsibility, better pay, total isolation. "Can I think about it?" Ethan asked. "Take your time," his supervisor said. But positions like this don't come around often. That night, during a storm, Ethan climbed to the top of the lighthouse tower. Rain pounded against the windows. Wind howled like something alive. The beacon light rotated, cutting through the darkness and fog, and that's when he saw her. Down on the beach, barely visible through the rain, someone was walking alone. He couldn't see clearly, but something told him it was important. He grabbed his binoculars and looked closer. It was a woman with dark hair, wrapped in a coat, walking slowly along the shore. Her shadow, even in that stormy darkness, was visible for just a moment when lightning flashed, and his shadow, cast by the lighthouse beam, seemed to reach down toward the beach, toward her shadow. That's when Ethan understood something he couldn't put into words. Something about connection, about searching, about shadows knowing truth before people do. The town started preparing for its annual Autumn Moon Festival, and suddenly everything felt different. Colorful paper lanterns appeared on every street corner. Local shops decorated their windows with orange and gold streamers. The festival committee set up booths along the waterfront, getting ready for the weekend celebration. Maya had almost forgotten about the festival until Mrs. Chen stopped by her studio one afternoon. The old woman bought a small ceramic bowl, running her fingers over the smooth glaze with appreciation. "Beautiful work," Mrs. Chen said, her eyes crinkling. "You should display at the festival. People need to see what you create." Maya shook her head. "I don't know. Festivals aren't really my thing. Too many people. Sometimes what we need isn't what we think we want, Mrs. Chen replied, leaving coins on the counter. The festival committee still has booth space. Think about it. After she left, Maya did think about it. The rent was due in 2 weeks and she was short. A festival booth might bring in some sales. And maybe getting out, being around people, would help her stop obsessing over shadows and strange feelings. She called the festival coordinator that evening and signed up for a spot near the Iron Bridge. Of course it had to be near the bridge. That bridge seemed to be at the center of everything lately. Ethan received different news about the festival. His supervisor asked him to document everything for the town's historical archive. It was an honor, apparently. The lighthouse keepers had been photographing the festival for 50 years, creating a visual timeline of the town's traditions. "You're our best photographer," his supervisor said. "Plus, it'll be good for you to interact with the community more. You've been keeping to yourself too much lately." Ethan couldn't argue with that. He had been isolating himself more than usual, avoiding town, avoiding people, avoiding the questions he couldn't answer about shadows and feelings and that strange pull toward the Iron Bridge. He accepted the assignment and started planning his shots. Historical documentation required careful composition, capturing not just the events but the feeling of them. He decided to set up his main position near the bridge, where he'd have a good view of the waterfront and the lantern displays. The bridge again. Always the bridge. The week before the festival, Maya threw herself into creating new pieces specifically for display. She worked with a kind of creative frenzy she hadn't felt in years. Ideas poured out of her faster than she could execute them. She made a series of vessels, each designed with unusual curves and openings. When her friend Lisa stopped by to help her pack pieces for the festival, she picked up one of the new vessels and turned it in the light. "These are incredible," Lisa said. "But they're so different from your usual stuff." "What inspired them?" Maya looked at the piece in Lisa's hands. It was a white ceramic vessel with 2 openings that faced each other. When you held a light inside it, it cast 2 shadows on the wall that moved toward each other, eventually merging into one. "I don't know," Maya admitted. "They just came to me. I've been dreaming about shadows lately. I know that sounds weird." "Artists are supposed to be weird," Lisa laughed. "It's part of the job description." But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that these pieces meant something, that she was working out some mystery through clay and glaze that her conscious mind couldn't solve. Ethan spent the week before the festival reviewing his equipment and scouting locations. He walked the festival route multiple times, planning angles and lighting considerations. Every path he took seemed to lead him back to the bridge. One evening he stood there with his camera, testing different settings in the fading light. That's when he noticed something carved into the bridge's iron railing. Words old and worn, barely visible. He leaned closer to read them. "Where shadows meet, truth speaks." He ran his fingers over the carving. How long had that been there? Had he just never noticed it before? He took a photo of the inscription, and when he developed it later, his own shadow in the image seemed to be reaching toward the words, as if trying to touch them. The festival began on a Friday evening, just as the sun started setting. Maya arrived early to set up her booth, arranging her pieces on white cloth-covered tables. She positioned her shadow vessel series at the front, each piece catching the late afternoon light in interesting ways. Other vendors set up around her. A woman selling handmade jewelry, a couple with organic honey and preserves, a teenager with painted rocks and dream catchers. Everyone was friendly, excited, ready for the crowds to arrive. As the sun set, festival volunteers lit the paper lanterns. Hundreds of them, strung between buildings, hanging from trees, floating on the water in small boats. The effect was magical, transforming the ordinary waterfront into something from a fairy tale. Orange, red, yellow, and white lights danced in the evening breeze, casting multiple shadows everywhere. Ethan showed up with his camera bag and tripod, finding his chosen spot near the bridge. He started shooting immediately, capturing the transformation of the town as darkness fell and lanterns took over from daylight. The shots were good, really good, but he felt that same emptiness, like something essential was missing from every frame. The festival crowd grew as night settled in. Families with children, couples holding hands, groups of teenagers laughing together, elderly folks moving slowly and savoring everything. Musicians played on a small stage. Food vendors filled the air with the smell of grilled fish and sweet pastries. Maya found herself actually enjoying the evening. Several people stopped to admire her work. A few made purchases. An older couple spent 20 minutes discussing which piece they wanted, eventually choosing one of her shadow vessels. They held it up to a lantern, watching the shadows it cast, delighted by the effect. "This is so clever," the woman said. "Look how the shadows come together. It's like they're meant for each other." Maya smiled and wrapped the piece carefully, but the woman's words stuck in her mind. Meant for each other. Around 8 o'clock, Maya stepped away from her booth to walk around and see the festival. Her friend Lisa agreed to watch the table for a bit. Maya bought a cup of spiced tea and wandered through the crowd, letting the energy of the celebration wash over her. Her feet carried her toward the bridge without her really deciding to go there. It was habit by now that pulled toward the iron bridge. When she reached it, she stopped to look at the display of lanterns strung along its railings. The light was beautiful, creating layered shadows on the stone wall that danced and shifted as the lantern swayed. That's when she saw him. A man stood on the other side of the bridge, setting up a camera on a tripod. He was focused on his work, adjusting angles, checking settings. The lantern light caught his face profile, and something about him seemed familiar, though Maya was certain they'd never met. Ethan looked up from his camera and saw her standing there. A woman with dark hair holding a paper cup watching the lanterns. Something about her presence made him pause, made him look twice. She seemed familiar in a way he couldn't explain. Their eyes met across the bridge. Neither smiled. Neither waved. It was just a moment of recognition, though recognition of what neither could say. Then Maya's attention was caught by something else. On the stone wall of the bridge, lit by the warm glow of surrounding lanterns and the faint moon now visible between clouds, she saw shadows. 2 shadows. One was clearly hers, matching her position and posture. The other was his, from where he stood by his camera. But on the wall, those shadows weren't standing apart. They were reaching toward each other, leaning in, almost touching. As the lantern swayed and the light shifted, the shadows moved together like dancers, like old friends, like something more. Maya blinked, not trusting her eyes. This couldn't be real. Shadows didn't do this. But when she looked again, the shadows were still there, still reaching for each other while the people who cast them stood motionless on opposite ends of the bridge. Ethan saw it too. He stared at the wall, at his shadow and the shadow of the woman across from him, watching them interact in ways that defied simple physics. He'd studied light and shadow for years through his photography. He knew how they worked. This wasn't how they worked. Neither of them moved. The festival continued around them, people laughing and eating and celebrating, completely unaware of what was happening on that bridge. Mrs. Chen walked by with her small bag of groceries, glanced at the wall, saw the shadows, and smiled to herself before continuing on her way. Finally, Ethan did something. He walked across the bridge toward Maya. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just a normal walk, like he was going to ask her about something simple. "Hi," he said when he reached her. "I'm Ethan." "Maya," she replied, her voice slightly uncertain. They stood there, 2 strangers who felt like something other than strangers. The festival noise faded into background. The lanterns swayed. The moon hung faint in the sky above them, and on the stone wall beside them their shadows finally touched completely, overlapping, becoming one single silhouette. 2 made one complete. They stood on that bridge for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Neither knew what to say. The festival continued around them, but they were in their own bubble of confusion and strange recognition. "Did you see that?" Maya finally asked, gesturing toward the wall where their shadows had merged. "The shadows, I mean. The way they—" "Yes," Ethan said simply. "I saw it." The relief in Maya's face was immediate. "So I'm not crazy. Or if I am crazy, at least you're seeing the same crazy thing." Ethan almost laughed. "I've been seeing crazy things for weeks. Eyeshadow showing up in photos where it shouldn't. Moving wrong. Acting like it's looking for something." "Mine too," Maya breathed out. "I thought I was working too hard, not sleeping enough. But it's been getting worse. Or weirder. Or both." They looked at each other, really looked, and something passed between them. Not quite understanding, but acknowledgement. Whatever was happening, they weren't alone in experiencing it. "I need to get back to my booth," Maya said, though she didn't move. "My friend is covering for me, but—" "Right. and I should finish documenting the festival. Ethan gestured to his camera setup on the bridge, but neither of them left. Instead, Maya asked, "Do you want to meet for coffee sometime? I mean, maybe we should talk about this. Figure out if there's an explanation." "Tomorrow?" Ethan suggested. "The cafe on Pine Street? Around 10? Okay, yes, that works." They exchanged phone numbers, typed into phones with slightly shaking hands, still not quite understanding what was happening, but knowing somehow that this meeting mattered. When Maya walked back to her booth, Lisa took one look at her face and grinned. "What happened to you? You look like you saw a ghost, or met someone interesting." "Maybe both," Maya muttered, but she couldn't stop a small smile. The rest of the festival passed in a blur. Maya sold more pieces, talked to customers, packed up her remaining inventory, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the moment on the bridge, the shadows merging, the way Ethan had looked at her with the same confusion she felt. Ethan finished his photography work but kept glancing toward Maya's booth. He could see her from his position, helping customers, smiling, working. Every time the lantern light shifted, he watched their shadows on various surfaces, seeing them reach for each other even when the people who cast them were far apart. They met the next morning at the cafe. It was a small place, mostly empty at 10 on a Saturday. They both arrived early and ended up standing outside at the same time, which made them laugh nervously. Inside, they ordered coffee and sat by the window. The autumn sun was bright, casting clear shadows on their table. Those shadows immediately leaned toward each other, tips touching. "Okay, that's just weird," Maya said, staring at the table. "I've been dealing with this for weeks," Ethan replied. "You get used to it." "Sort of." They talked for 3 hours, about the shadows first, about when it started for each of them, what they'd noticed, how it had escalated. Maya told him about her studio experiences, about drawing shadows she didn't remember seeing, about feeling pulled to the bridge. Ethan shared his photography problems, the images that didn't make sense, the darkroom incidents, his own magnetic pull to that same bridge. It started that night, Maya realized suddenly, like 2 or 3 weeks ago. "I was walking home late, passed over the bridge, felt this weird chill. That's when it began." "Same for me," Ethan said, leaning forward. "Same night, I think. I walked across that bridge on my way to this cafe. Felt strange, but didn't think much of it then." They stared at each other as understanding dawned. They'd been on that bridge the same night. They'd passed each other, probably. Two strangers, not noticing each other, but their shadows had noticed. Their shadows had met first. "This is impossible," Maya said. "Shadows are just... they're nothing. They're absence of light. They can't have awareness or memory or whatever this is." "I know," Ethan agreed. "But here we are." The conversation shifted to other topics. Normal topics. They discovered they both loved the ocean, but for different reasons. Maya loved it for its constant change, how it never looked the same twice. Ethan loved it for its reliability, how it kept its rhythm no matter what happened on land. Maya told him about her struggles as an artist, the gallery rejections, the financial stress, the pressure from family to get a real job. Ethan shared his story about becoming a lighthouse keeper after his mother died, how the isolation had helped at first but maybe wasn't helping anymore. "My father wants to have dinner," Ethan said, stirring his 3rd cup of coffee. "He remarried 2 years ago. I haven't really dealt with that well. Feels like betrayal even though I know that's not fair. My ex used to criticize my art," Maya shared. "Said I should make more commercial stuff, things that actually sell. After we broke up, I couldn't create anything for 6 months. I was so scared he was right that my real voice wasn't worth anything." They opened up in ways neither expected, sharing fears and failures with someone they'd just met. It should have felt strange, but it didn't. It felt natural, like continuing a conversation they'd started long ago. Over the next few weeks, they kept meeting. Coffee shops, walks along the beach, visits to each other's workplaces. They told themselves they were just friends, just two people who'd experienced something weird together and bonded over it. But there was something else there, something neither wanted to name yet. Ethan visited Maya's studio and saw her Shadow Vessel series. He held each piece carefully, watching how the light moved through them, creating shadow patterns on the walls. The largest vessel cast shadows that formed 2 figures reaching for each other, almost embracing. "When did you make this?" he asked. 3 days after that night on the bridge," Maya said. I didn't plan it. I just started working and this came out. I made the whole series in 1 week, barely sleeping. It was like something was pushing me to create them. I did something similar, Ethan said. He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo series. Months of images, all featuring his shadow in unusual ways. Always seeming incomplete. Always reaching for something outside the frame. You took these before we met, Maya observed. Yeah. My shadow was looking for yours before I even knew you existed. They stood in the studio, surrounded by her pottery and his photographs, evidence of something neither could explain. The late afternoon sun coming through the window cast their shadows on the wall, and as always those shadows leaned together, merged at the edges, completed each other. Maya felt her heart racing. This was more than friendship. She knew it. But the fear was there too, the memory of past hurt, the knowledge that opening up meant risking everything. Ethan felt it too. The pull toward her was getting stronger, but so was the fear. His mother's death had taught him that love meant loss eventually. His father's remarriage felt like proof that nothing lasted. Why risk that pain again? One evening they walked the beach together, talking about everything and nothing. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. Their shadows stretched long across the sand, intertwined like dancers. I got offered a job, Ethan said suddenly. Head lighthouse keeper position. On an island about 3 hours from here. It's a promotion. More money. More responsibility. Maya felt her stomach drop but tried to keep her voice steady. That's great, congratulations. When would you start? I haven't accepted yet. I have until the end of the month to decide. They walked in silence for a while. The waves crashed rhythmically. Seabirds called overhead. Their shadows moved together on the sand, ignoring the tension between the people casting them. And you? Ethan asked. Any news on the gallery front? Maya had been avoiding telling him, but now seemed like the time. I got accepted to a residency program. In the city. It's a year-long thing. Studio space, materials provided, connection to galleries and buyers. It's exactly what I need for my career. That's amazing, Ethan said, and he meant it. But his heart sank. When do you leave? I have 2 months to decide. They both stopped walking and turned to face the ocean. The sun was almost down now, just a sliver of gold on the horizon. Behind them, their shadows stretched toward the lighthouse in the distance, still merged, still refusing to separate. We're both running away, Maya said quietly. Maybe, Ethan agreed. Or maybe we're both making smart career decisions. Right, smart decisions. That's what this is, but neither of them believed it. They were running from what they felt, from what their shadows had known from the beginning. They were choosing fear over possibility, safety over risk. That night, Ethan stood in the lighthouse observation room, surrounded by photographs he'd been organizing. He'd created a timeline without meaning to, a visual story of his shadow searching for Maya's. Picture after picture showing incompleteness, reaching, longing. The newest photos were different. The ones taken after they met. In those images, his shadow looked complete. Even when Maya wasn't physically in the frame, his shadow seemed at peace, no longer searching. He sat down on the floor, surrounded by evidence of something he was too afraid to fully embrace. His phone buzzed. A text from his father. Still hoping we can have that dinner. I miss you, son. Ethan stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Maybe next week. Meanwhile, Maya sat in her studio, looking at acceptance letter from the residency program. It was everything she'd worked for, a real chance to make it as an artist, to prove. The weeks passed quickly, autumn deepening into early winter. Maya and Ethan kept meeting, but there was a tension now that hadn't been there before. They both had decisions to make. Deadlines approaching, futures pulling them in different directions. Maya threw herself into preparing for the residency, telling herself she'd definitely accept it. She organized her portfolio, researched the city where she'd be living, started mentally preparing for a year away from her little coastal town, but every time she sat down to write the acceptance email, something stopped her. Ethan began packing up his belongings at the lighthouse, sorting through 3 years of accumulated possessions. He told his supervisor he was probably going to take the island position. Probably, almost certainly. It made sense. It was the logical choice for his career, but he kept putting off signing the contract. They didn't talk about their decisions when they were together. Instead, they talked about everything else. Ethan told Maya about his mother, about the grief he'd been carrying, about how angry he'd been at his father for moving on. Maya shared more about her ex, about how she'd lost herself in that relationship, how she'd confused love with diminishment. "I think I'm afraid," Maya admitted one evening as they sat on the beach, wrapped in blankets against the cold wind. "Afraid that if I stay here, if I don't take this residency, I'll regret it forever. But also afraid that if I go, I'll regret that too." "Fear of missing out versus fear of missing what's right in front of you," Ethan said. "I get it. I'm afraid that if I don't take the island job, I'm just avoiding life. But I'm also afraid that I'm taking it for the wrong reasons, running away instead of running toward." "Are you running from your father?" Maya asked gently. Ethan was quiet for a long time. "Yeah, probably. He wants to talk about Mom, about his new wife, about making peace. And I just want to be angry a little longer. It's easier than dealing with it." "Is it easier, though?" "No," Ethan admitted. "It's exhausting. But it's familiar." "You know?" Maya nodded. She understood familiar pain. It was safer than unfamiliar happiness in some ways. That night they walked back toward town together. The streets were quiet, most shops already closed. They found themselves, as always, walking toward the iron bridge. They'd passed over it dozens of times together now, always watching their shadows, always marveling at how they moved toward each other independent of light source or angle. Mrs. Chen was there, surprisingly, standing by her flower cart even though it was past 9. She smiled when she saw them approach. "Still fighting it," she observed, shaking her head. "Young people always fight the clearest truths." "Fighting what?" Maya asked. "What your shadows already know," Mrs. Chen replied. She reached into her cart and pulled out 2 white lilies, handing one to each of them. "I saw this once before, many years ago. 2 people whose shadows fell in love first. They fought it too for a while. Took them 3 years to listen to what was obvious." "What happened to them?" Ethan asked. "They got married, had 4 children, grew old together. Died within a month of each other, still holding hands." Mrs. Chen smiled at the memory. "The old stories say shadows are wiser than people. They see souls, not surfaces. They recognize their matches before we do." She patted Maya's hand and then Ethan's. "But shadows can't make choices for you. That's the human part. The hard part, you have to decide if you're brave enough to trust what your shadows already know." She walked away then, pushing her cart slowly down the empty street, humming an old song. Maya and Ethan stood on the bridge, each holding a white lily, watching their shadows on the stone wall. The shadows were completely merged now, indistinguishable from each other, forming one silhouette. "This is crazy," Maya whispered. "We barely know each other. A few weeks. That's nothing." "My shadow's been looking for yours for months before we met," Ethan countered. "Maybe that counts for something." "Shadows aren't real," Maya argued, but weakly. "They're just light and absence of light. They can't know anything. Then why do I feel more myself when I'm with you than I have in years?" Ethan asked. "Why do you look at my photographs and see exactly what I was trying to capture? Why do I understand what you're trying to express in your pottery before you explain it?" Maya didn't have an answer. Or she did, but she was afraid to say it. They stood there in the cold November air, the faint moon barely visible above them, their shadows telling a story their mouths couldn't yet speak. "I'm scared," Maya finally said. "I'm scared that if we do this, if we try this, one of us will end up hurt. I'm scared I'll give up my dreams for you, or you'll give up yours for me and we'll end up resenting each other." "I'm scared too," Ethan admitted. "I'm scared of losing someone else I love. I'm scared of not being enough. I'm scared that if I stay here instead of taking that job, I'm making a mistake. But I'm also scared that if I leave, I'm walking away from something real for something safe." They turned to face each other. The distance between them was maybe 2 feet. Their shadows on the wall were already embracing. "What if we didn't run?" Maya asked. "What if I turned down the residency and you turned down the island job and we both stayed here and tried this, whatever this is?" "And what if it didn't work out?" "Then at least we'd know," Ethan said. "We wouldn't spend the rest of our lives wondering what if." "What about my art career?" "You're talented. You'll make it with or without that residency. And if you need to go to the city eventually, we'll figure it out. There are no rules that say you have to choose between your art and—" He trailed off. "And this?" Maya finished. "Us?" "Yeah, us." The word hung in the air between them. "Us." a small word with enormous weight. Maya thought about her shadow vessels, the series she'd created in a creative frenzy after that first night on the bridge. She thought about how each piece was about two things becoming one, about completion, about finding what you didn't know you were missing. She'd been trying to work something out through her art, and now she understood what it was. Ethan thought about his photographs, the months of images showing his shadow searching. He thought about how photography was about capturing truth, about seeing what was really there beneath the surface. His shadow had been telling him the truth all along. He'd just been too afraid to listen. "I don't want the residency," Maya said suddenly. "I mean, I did want it, but I want this more. I want to see where this goes. I want to stop running from something real because I'm afraid it might hurt." "I don't want the island job," Ethan said. "I want to stay here. I want to have dinner with my father and stop being angry at him for being human. I want to take pictures of you in your studio covered in clay dust. I want to see your face when you finish a piece you're proud of." They stepped closer. Their shadows on the wall had been waiting for this, patient and knowing. "My shadow fell in love with yours first," Maya whispered. "Mine too," Ethan said. They kissed there on the iron bridge, under the faint moonlight that had witnessed the beginning of their story. It wasn't dramatic or perfect. It was cold and their noses bumped and Maya still held the lily Mrs. Chen had given her. But it was real. It was choosing courage over fear, possibility over safety, trust over doubt. On the stone wall beside them, their shadows finally stopped reaching, stopped searching. They'd found what they were looking for. The next morning, Maya sent an email declining the residency with thanks and asking to be considered for future opportunities. She felt lighter than she had in months. That afternoon, she started working on a new series inspired by beginnings instead of endings, by finding instead of searching. Ethan called his supervisor and turned down the island position. Then he called his father and said yes to dinner finally, after months of avoiding it. They set a date for the following week. That evening, he went through his photographs and selected his favorites, the ones showing his shadow searching and the ones showing completion, creating a series he titled Before and After. They met at the cafe that evening, both grinning like idiots. "I didn't take it," Maya said. "Me neither," Ethan replied. They laughed, relief and joy mixing together. They'd made the harder choice, the scarier choice. They'd chosen each other and themselves, trusted that they could build something without sacrificing who they were. It wasn't perfect after that. Real life never is. They argued sometimes about small things mostly. Maya got frustrated when Ethan worked too many night shifts. Ethan got annoyed when Maya got so focused on her art that she forgot to eat. They had to learn each other's rhythms, accommodate each other's needs, figure out how to be together without losing themselves. But they did it. They learned. They grew. 3 months later, Maya got an email from a gallery in the city that had seen her Shadow Vessel series online. They wanted to feature her work in a group show. She accepted, thrilled, and Ethan took a weekend off to go with her for the opening. 6 months after that, Ethan's photograph series won a regional competition, leading to a commission to document coastal lighthouses for a historical preservation project. He could do the work from home, with short trips up and down the coast. They moved in together after a year, finding a small house halfway between the lighthouse and Maya's studio. It had big windows that let in lots of light, creating interesting shadows throughout the day. They noticed their shadows still did that thing, still leaned toward each other, still merged.